Thanks, Marianne, and welcome and thank you everybody for joining us. First, let me say how great everybody looks. I didn't know if I would be the only one that dressed the part for Thurby tonight or not, but from what I can tell, everybody looks great. I love the hats, and it's making me wish that September were here already with what should be Thurby. Well, speaking of, as Marianne said, I'm Matt Willinger. I'm Executive Director of Operations for Louisville Alumni. And thank you all for joining us for another one of our ongoing virtual engagement sessions tonight. Most appropriately, we have Derby mixology and Derby themed cocktails for what would be Derby week. We're really appreciative to have everybody here, and especially our guest, Beth Burrows, who's an American whiskey ambassador for Beam Suntory. Hi, Beth.
Hey, how's it going?
Beth is our featured cocktail expert, and she studied at U of L in the College of Education. She's a master of all things bourbon, and we're happy to have her join us for this special edition of Cocktails with Cardinals. First, going to tell you a little bit about Jim Beam. Since 1795, 7 generations of the Beam family have been making whiskey for the company we know as Jim Beam. You can visit the Jim Beam Urban Stillhouse at 4th Street Live, where Beth helped design the unique historical experience that includes a working distillery, a bottling line, and a tasting experience. And now Beth spreads the good word of Jim Beam bourbon around the state through tastings, educational workshops, and events like tonight's Cocktails with Cardinals. So Beth's going to teach us how to make a couple Derby-themed cocktails. And Beth, thanks for joining for us. You sound like you have a pretty cool job. How do you get such an awesome job to be an American whiskey ambassador?
A lot of luck, in all honesty, and being in the right place at the right time. So like you said, I studied sports admin, had an idea that I was going to be like an AD of a school, which I interned there. Everywhere that I interned was not what I expected it to be. But throughout all of it, I was in bars and restaurants. I started at a very, very young age with my parents' restaurant in Western New York, and it kind of just escalated from there. It was never really a time that I wasn't working in the service industry in some way, shape, or form. So in 2013, Down One Bourbon Bar opened up next to the Yum Center.
Yep.
After the Yum Center was the amazing turnaround point for downtown Louisville. And so the businesses that built up around it, and Down One was one of them. So I started as a server there because it was the only position available, and I thought it was a super cool place and I wanted to be a part of it. And from there, went from server to bartender to bar manager to AGM to eventually the general manager before I took this job where I stepped out as general manager and became the American Whiskey Ambassador for the home place here in Kentucky.
Very, very cool. Well, thank you for joining us. You're going to make you're going to show us how to make 3 drinks tonight. What are you going to walk us through?
So the first one is going to be a mint julep, and we're going to talk about how to make a proper mint julep as well as a mocktail mint julep. So if you're not going to partake in the beverages of the alcohol variety during this Derby and Thurby, you can definitely follow along that way. We also have an old fashioned, which I love to showcase because if you can make a proper old fashioned, you can wow any crowd. Plus, it's the official cocktail of Louisville. So I feel like it's a necessity that we all know how to make a proper old fashioned.
Yes.
And then we'll finish it out with a Manhattan because we're going to round out some classics there.
Perfect. Well, let's get started.
For sure. And we can talk through all of this. If there's any questions that pop up along the way, please let me know. I can see them kind of popping up on the bottom, but I can't read them because they move a little fast. So in order to do your mint julep, we are going to build inside of the glass. So if you have your julep glass, amazing. If you have a julep tin, which is what I happen to be using, just like you, fantastic. Perfect. We're going to build it directly into that glass. The first thing that you want to do is have your loose mint leaves. I'm going to put 6 to 10, depending on how fragrant, how fresh. I just got these today, so they are in the bottom. Just a nice little handful, so you can see that inside of the glass. And then the next thing I'm going to add is my simple syrup. So no fancy container, apologies. I'm using quite a bit of simple syrup, so the plastic containers are where it's at for me right now.
Perfect.
And you always want to make your cocktails. We'll talk about the other ones later, but when you're making cocktails that have a lot of ingredients specifically, this one doesn't have a lot, but it has a sugar and it has a mint. Those are kind of more disposable than our alcohol itself, right? So we want to make sure that the alcohol is the last thing that goes in, because if we mess up something along the way, we want to make sure the alcohol doesn't get into that mistake, right? So for me, I'm going to do a 2 parts of my whiskey, so my bourbon. Today we're going to be using Knob Creek. and we'll pour that in a second, to 1 part of my simple syrup. Okay, so this is a jigger. I don't know how many of you all are cocktail efficient or, you know, proficient or where we are in our journey. So I'm going to talk about what I'm using just in case. So this is a jigger. This is going to be a 1 ounce. This is going to be a 1/2 ounce. And when I say parts, I am talking in ounces. So just be aware of that. So I'm going to put my 1 part right there on top of my mint leaves. All right. And then I just crushed in my Lewis bag some ice so that I can get that nice fresh crushed ice for my mint julep. And I'm just gonna fill the glass about 1/3 of the way with crushed ice. So just a little bit, and it's sticking, sorry. Just about like this, if you guys can see into my glass, right? So it's only about 1/3 of the way down. And this is where we're going to mix and combine. So we've got our mint leaves, our simple syrup in there, and a little bit of ice. Now you're gonna take your cocktail spoon. If you don't have a cocktail spoon, totally fine. Just grab a spoon from the kitchen. And we're just going to pretty much agitate that mint. So you're taking your spoon and chopping at it. You're not really moving it around or anything. You're just chopping through the ice until that mint becomes fragrant. I don't know how this bar ASMR is going for you guys right now. It might be a little loud, and I apologize if it is.
A question we received is there a substitute? What if you don't have mint, but you still want to make a mint julep? What can you do?
So it wouldn't technically be a mint julep, but you could always do a basil julep. You could do, rosemary might be a little bit aggressive, depending on how you feel about thyme. You could always throw that in there as well. So yeah, you can experiment with different herbs if you don't have mint at home, or if the stores are sold out, like a lot of stores are right now in the state of Kentucky. All right, so I have gone ahead and mingled my mint in here. I've agitated it so it's very aromatic now, along with my simple syrup. And there's been a little bit of dilution because that ice is starting to melt. And I'm using a bag of ice, you all, so it's not anything fancy. And it's gonna melt quicker than if you're using a more premium ice. All right, so I'm going to take my Knob Creek, which is a 9-year, 100-proof bourbon. It's a little aggressive to start with, but this is where we are, right? It's Thursday. It's supposed to be Thurby. We're going with it. All right, so I'm going to add 2 parts. So that's going to be filling this guy 2 times. If you don't want this strong at 100 proof of a julep, you can always do 1.5 parts. You can always use a bourbon or whiskey that is a little bit less than proof too, right? There's no problem with that at all. I'm going to pick up.
Talking to Louisville alumni, I'm sure it's strong enough.
I feel like you're my people, so we should be good. All right, so now that we've got that bourbon in there, we're gonna give it a nice little stir and make sure that we mix that bourbon, that mint, everything there with it. All right. And then we're gonna top it off with ice, because what is a mint julep if you don't have it packed with crushed ice, right? So just continue to fill that. We'll say making cocktails at, yeah, go ahead.
A question we got in the chat is, if you don't have the julep cup, is there a good substitution?
So the reason that there's a julep tin is so that it stays cold, right? Because with all that crushed ice, you want to just keep it as cold as possible so the dilution, because there is so much ice, isn't super aggressive. But if you have a julep glass, that will totally work. If you want to do it at a pint glass, that would totally work. I will say, if you are in a julep glass, be extra careful, because those glasses tend to be a little bit thinner. So if you start to move around too much, you could crack a glass. Nobody likes glass in their cocktail, right? So you definitely want to be careful about that. All right. So we have our julep that has been mixed all together with our mint, with our simple syrup, and with our bourbon. And then we've got our nice pack to the top with crushed ice. Now, in order to make sure that you smell that mint every single time, bourbon, you'll smell the bourbon, trust me. I just put 2 parts of 100 proof in there. So if you want to make sure that you can smell that mint, we want to take some fresh sprigs. And then you want to make sure that they're not too long, right? So I'm going to go ahead and take that off of there, that extra long stem. And I make just a nice little bundle of fresh mint. And I hold it here at the base, just like this. Excuse my nails. I have to wait until the 25th before I can get them done again. And then you're going to smack it around the outside, right? We call this slapping the mint around the
favorite
glass.
part.
Yes. So it's going to get nice and aromatic. And I continue to spin my glass, make sure that I get that aromatic all the way around there. One more time around. Perfect. And then you have to stand your mint up. I don't have any straws here with me, unfortunately, so I apologize. But typically you would take a straw. It would most likely be a metal straw, and you would place it right next to your mint and then push that mint sprig down into the cocktail. And then you would have a straw coming directly out of your mint. So even though you've already smacked it around, you have that aromatic, it will make sure that every time you take a sip of that julep, you're going to be getting the mint. And there's your mint julep and your nice frosty mug.
It looks awesome.
Thank you. I need to taste it, and I don't have a straw. We're going to try it anyway.
Now, of the three that you're making for us today, the Manhattan, the Old Fashioned, and the Mint Julep, which one is your favorite to make?
It would probably have to be an Old Fashioned. I've perfected my Old Fashioned through the years, and a good Old Fashioned, there's really just nothing like a good Old Fashioned, really. I mean, so that's probably my favorite. Julep, though, it definitely has its time right now in Kentucky.
Yeah, well, especially this time of year. But I'm with you, Old Fashioned. And once you have that down, that's kind of like the signature drink.
It is for sure. And if you can make a good Old Fashioned, people will trust you. I learned that.
Right.
If I can make an Old Fashioned, then people are like, oh, this is good. And they trust me about whiskey a whole lot more. So.
Well,
cool.
That's a segue. I guess we're heading into the Old Fashioned, right? Is that one next?
Yeah, the Old Fashioned is next. So for our Old Fashioned, we'll be using Legions.
Okay.
Which hopefully you guys can see. And this is a different choice. It's not going to be a typical choice that I think that people put in their Old Fashions. One, because it's a newer brand. So maybe they haven't had a chance to really experience Legion before. And this is honestly why Maureen and I met, which is super exciting. When Legion was launched, she got to see me act a fool in California. It was great. So Legion is going to be the first collaboration, just to give you guys a little bit of a background, because I think you need to understand the flavor profile of it and where it comes from as to why I chose it for the Old Fashioned and why it's going to play a little bit differently than maybe another Old Fashioned that you've had before. So Legion is going to be Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. So it's going to be 5-year Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey mingled with a 4-year Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey that's been finished in sherry casks and a 4-year Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey that's been finished in red wine barrels. So the 3 of those different aging techniques come together, and it's Legion. So it's a collaboration between our master distiller. It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Collaboration between our master distiller, Fred No, which you called out the family lineage there. So Fred is our 7th generation master distiller, 7th generation family distiller within the Beam family. And then he joined forces with our master blender. I'm sorry, not blast, master blender. He is our chief blender. So if you can see on here, our chief blender, Shinji Fukuyo, from our Suntory side of our business. Okay, so it's hard because I have lights going at me, sorry, but there's Fred's face and Shinji's face inside of our little brush stroke there on the front. So
very cool.
True, right? True collaboration between the two of them. If you know anything about Japanese whiskey, you know that it is all about the art of blending and bringing purpose to everything that they do. So it's a very purposeful Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey that we've been doing for 225 years that has just a little bit of Japanese finesse on there. So it's super exciting. It sips differently. It tastes a little bit different. It is 94 proof. So just a heads up, there's my little spiel on that guy. So we will be needing a rocks glass for this cocktail to pour it in at the end. But to make it, we're going to need our mixing glass. So this can be a pint glass. This can be anything. If you need to build it in your glass, that's totally fine. I just like to build and then pour into the glass. Personal preference. Since this is just going to be our sugar, bitters, and bourbon, and I know how to make it, I'm not going to worry about putting in my bourbon first. And this is going to be a 2-part to half a part. So 2 parts of my bourbon directly in there. All right. And then a half part of my simple.
Okay, now one of the questions we've been receiving is what's in the simple, and is it custom made or can it be bought in a store here locally?
Can be totally bought at Kroger. It's where like the cherries and the margarita mixes and stuff are. And so you can definitely buy what comes in the stores if you want to make it easy. But it's called simple syrup for a reason. It's super simple. All right, it's just going to be equal parts water and sugar. So this is a little bit darker in color because I use a demerara sugar, so like a cane sugar, because I like that flavor. It's got a little bit more richness to it. It's a little more rounded to me than a refined like white sugar. Personal preference. You can make that, and if you want to get real crazy with it, you can make your simple syrups taste like things. So next week I'm going to be doing a Baker's Old Fashioned with a Pepsi simple syrup because Baker B loves Pepsi and Baker's. So I decided to make an old fashioned out of it because why not, right?
We might have to have you come back on for another session to do another round of drinks after this one is over.
I would love to. I love making cocktails and showing people how to enjoy them at home. So please. All right, so far we have our Legion in there at 2 parts. We have our simple syrup in there at a 1/2 part, and then we're gonna add our bitters. This is where you can really play around. Like I said, you can play around with the simple syrup for sure, and of course you can play around with what your base spirit is inside of your old fashioned. But bitters is a really easy way to change up the way that you taste. So last night I made a Booker's Old Fashioned, and I used a fig and cinnamon bitters in there instead of my traditional bitters.
Oh, cool.
So there's a lot of really crazy bitters out there that you can find online that you can order on Amazon. Black Cloud Bitters is out of Canada. They've got some really cool stuff. So feel free to explore the bitters category. But for today, we'll keep it simple, which is my traditional bitters of Angostura, which is what you can buy in any store. You should be able to get Angostura anywhere. And the label is meant to be like this. It's from Trinidad and Tobago. It's one of the first bitters that came out. Fun side story, they ordered the bottles. One brother ordered the bottles, one brother ordered the labels, and the labels were much bigger than the bottle. And that became the staple of Angostura bitters. You got to use what you got, right? That's what we're learning, especially in this time.
Be creative.
Use what you have. And then the other one is going to be orange bitters, and these happen to be Fee Brothers out of Rochester, New York. You can definitely use any orange bitters. Lots of people have come out with them, all sorts of different brands. So I'm going to do, for my personal preference, 2 dashes of each. So 2 dashes of my Angostura and 2 dashes of my orange. I have to check my tops. I did a cocktail demo for a bourbon group last week, and I hadn't used my chocolate bitters in a while, and the top wasn't on it. So on a live demo, I went like this, and literally all of it just came out into my cocktail. It was a great freeze frame, though. My face was very surprised. So I tell you that to tell you this. You're going to mess up, and it's totally fine. I've been making cocktails for longer than I'd like to admit, and I still mess up. So if you make a mistake, it's totally okay.
And if you make a mistake, you still get to drink your mistakes. Exactly.
You definitely still get to drink those mistakes. I wouldn't drink the glass full of bitters, though. That would have been I had to let that one go. But so our mixture here with our bourbon, our simple syrup, and our bitters, I'm then going to add ice on top. Okay. And we're going to stir this guy. So you want to take that cocktail spoon. When it comes to properly stirring, if you do have a cocktail spoon at home, you want to hold the spoon between your 2 middle fingers there. Real light and easy. You're going to put the back of the spoon against the side of the glass, and it's all about your wrist. Your hand is literally just guiding. So it looks like this.
Oh, nice.
All right.
Now so one of the questions we received is, is there an optimal size of ice cube for this drink?
So typically, if I had like my choice, I would put 1 large cube inside of my rocks glass and pour over that. That way the dilution's a little slower. I'm getting the proper chill right now from my stirring, so I don't have to worry so much about the chill. But because we're at home, I'm all out of my Kentucky straight ice. So we're on to the bagged ice. I can tell that this has been stirring long enough because you can see a little bit of frost forming around, and you can also feel it, right? So I know that that's going to be good. And then I'm going to set that to the side, grab some ice for my glass, just that old bagged ice. And then I'm going to take my Hawthorne strainer here, put it right in the top. And I do like to let people know the strainer is meant to go into your container, right? And then make sure that it stays in there. That being said, it doesn't always take a tight grip, and that's what this guy is for. So you want to make sure that you put your finger over the top there so that it doesn't slide and you have control. And you're going to pour directly over your ice. You don't have to spin your glass. It's a bad habit that I have. I just can't break it.
It's a nice trick, though. It makes it look better.
Get all the drops out of there, right? Get to the last drop. Fantastic. And so that's your old fashioned without a garnish. You can still smell the orange bitters if you were able to put those in there. The Angostura gives it that nice little bit of a darker color than it had before. And then I'm going to finish with an orange peel. So just take a little swath of orange. We want to make sure that we don't get any of the actual orange in there. Spin that, right? So there's no orange on the inside. It's just that pith. Real technical, guys. We're going to hold it hamburger style with the orange facing your cocktail. You want to make sure that when you express these oils, you're expressing them directly over your cocktail. So it's just a little squeeze and a movement. And I don't know if you can see it actually spraying.
Okay.
Probably not. My lights aren't that good. But you can definitely smell it. When you express those oils, that orange aromatic hits you all of a sudden. And you can tell on your orange peel that it's nice and shiny now. So it has those oils exposed. I'm then going to wipe those oils around the outside of my glass. So we smack the mint around to get an aromatic. Now we're going to go ahead and wipe oil so that every sip has that orange to it. And there's no orange muddled in here. The only thing we have orange is going to be our bitters and the aromatic that's coming off this peel here. So you set it straight up in there and cheers. There's your
Very
old-fashioned.
cool. It looks delicious.
We had a
Super
question
easy.
come in on your bitters as well. If you don't have two different kind of bitters, do you recommend using 4 dashes, or what's your recommendation there?
I wouldn't go really more than 2. I just do the 2 and the 2 because one, I'm a bartender from way back when, so I'm already a little bitter on the inside when it comes to my palate and other things. So for me, I like my old fashions to have a little bit more bitterness to it. Most people would typically only use 2 dashes as a whole. So 1 dash of Ango and 1 dash of your orange. If you want a little bit more, like I said, with mine, like it has a little bit more of that tannic taste to it. I just took a sip and I can feel it on the sides of my tongue. That's my bitters coming through.
So unless you're a professional, you don't care.
Exactly. I would do 1 dash, and then you can always add more, right? You just can't take any out. So if you add a dash and you're like, oh, that's not quite enough, add another dash. Remember, check your tops because you don't want to have a whole glass full of bitters.
All right. Well,
Perfect.
we're rounding out our 3rd drink. This one was my grandpa's favorite drink, a classic Manhattan.
Oh, fantastic. What did it's fine if it's not one of my brands. What did your grandpa put in his Manhattan?
I think just about anything. I don't think he was too particular. From what
Gotcha.
No.
Fantastic. Well, today we're going to use Basil Hayden. So
Okay.
Basil Hayden's is an 80 proof high rye bourbon. So when I say high rye, I don't mean that the main ingredient is rye. We still have at least 51% corn for it to be considered a bourbon, but that secondary ingredient or the flavoring ingredient is rye. And so just like all of our other mash bills, it's going to be rye, but with this guy, it's double the amount of rye. Okay, so 2 times the amount in that secondary ingredient. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. So it's going to be a little spicy, but because it's the 80 proof, it's not going to be overly spicy. Just to take a minute too to talk about the bottle if we can, because it's probably one of our prettier bottles. You have this amazing Basil Hayden belt on here. You've got your bib, and it typically has the foil over the top. I've already opened mine up, apologies, but it has a foil over the top with almost like a tax stamp that goes over the top. It's not a tax stamp, but it looks like one. So this is like my favorite thing to bring to dinner parties instead of wine, when I'm like, hey guys, everybody else brought you wine, but check out what I got you, right? So this is my gifting. Very sippable, very sessionable. So if you are starting your whiskey journey, Basil Hayden is a great place to start at 80 proof. If you have been on your whiskey journey for a while and you just want to revisit or start to visit some of the lower proofs, you can taste a whole lot of really great characteristics inside of this Basil Hayden. And I think it's going to go incredibly well in our Manhattan. So Manhattan is going to be very easy to remember if you can remember these things. 2, 1, 2. Okay. 2 parts of your whiskey to 1 part of your sweet vermouth to 2 dashes of bitters. 2, 1, 2. Very easy to remember. 2, 1, 2. So we're going to start with our mixing glass again. And we're going to put in our 2 parts of Basil Hayden, or whatever bourbon you have at home that you want to put in there, or rye. or Japanese whiskey or whatever it is that you're fancying today. I will say don't make it with the wine that you showed us earlier. I don't think it's going to go well.
No, that would not be good, I don't think. We'll just stick to the straight wine.
Perfect. All right, and so then you're going to have your sweet vermouth. I have Carpano Antica. This is one of my favorite sweet vermouths, but it is a little bit more on the expensive side. So if you have something that costs like $20 or so, like the Noilly Prat, that's totally fine. I'm not a huge fan of the way that certain sweet vermouths taste, so I've found my favorites, and this happens to be one of them. So I always want to make sure that it's on hand. But don't feel like you have to have like a $50 bottle of sweet vermouth to make your Manhattans with. You definitely don't. But as you can see, it's got nice little watermarks around it because it's been in the refrigerator. Call out. Put your sweet vermouth in the refrigerator. You should never pull it. So important. Stanley Tucci made a Negroni the other day on one of the late night shows, and he pulled his out and he's like, I've had it for a while. It's been open, and it was not in a refrigerator. That was probably a terrible cocktail strictly off of the fact that it was this spoiled sweet vermouth, right? You don't want that to happen. Sorry, Stanley Tucci, didn't mean to call you out there, but truth.
So if you're following at home, keep your vermouth in the fridge and make sure your cap is tight on your bitters.
Yes. Tricks of the trade so you don't end up like me. All right. So 2 parts of our Basil Hayden's, our bourbon in here, to 1 part of our sweet vermouth. We'll put right on top. And then we're going to take our Angostura Bitters that we had last time for our old fashioned, and we're going to add 2 dashes in there. Okay. You can also play with your Manhattans the way that we do with our old fashions with your bitters. If you want to change it to chocolate bitters like I did last week and garnish with some, I just took a Hershey's and peeled some Hershey's into there so that I had like little floating chocolates in there. You could use orange bitters. You could use literally any bitters that you want. Black walnut bitters. There's all sorts of different ones.
Yeah, that's fun. You can almost customize it to whatever you want to do for that day.
Most definitely. Once you start and you learn the basics, like you learn the 2-1-2, you learn the old fashioned build. Even when we were doing our mint julep, you can play around with the simple syrup that you put in there. I've done a prickly pear mint julep. I've done a blueberry black pepper. I've done a blackberry one. You can literally play as much as you want.
Very cool.
So while we're stirring, we want to take our coupe glass, or if you have a martini glass, that's totally fine too. You can also serve a Manhattan on the rocks. So if you want to put it into our glass like we had before in those rocks glass, that's totally fine. I will say that we want to chill it ahead of time, especially if it's in a coupe or a martini, because if we don't, the chill that we get from stirring is not necessarily going to last as we sip. So we want to make sure that our glass is cold as well. So I'm just going to add a little bit of ice to this coupe glass and let it sit while we add our ice to our mixing glass on top of our mixture here. All right. Then we're going to take our spoon again. Remember, between those 2 middle fingers, back to the side of the glass, and you're going to give it a spin.
All in the wrist.
It's all in the wrist. And I promise you guys, I was not good at this when I started. I was on the other side of the bar and got made fun of by one of my patrons. And he was like, that's a terrible stir. And so I went home and I learned how to stir with both hands. So if you want to learn, honestly, it's as easy as putting some water and ice inside of a mixing tin or mixing glass and just trying and continue to try until you get it. And when it clicks, it clicks. Perfect. So we can see that I'm getting that nice chill. I'm going to dump the ice out of my coupe glass. We don't want any water. We don't want any ice in there. Get it all out. And then we're going to take our strainer. And again, making sure that it's tight in there. This is a different strainer, so you guys can see that it doesn't have just a tab. Like, they look a little different on each one. It's totally fine. Just make sure that you keep it nice and taut inside of the glass. And then you pour all of your Manhattan into your glass. Again, good to the last drop. And when it comes to garnishing, you can do kind of whatever you want. Again, drink it any damn way you please is what our master distillers say, and I think that goes for just about anything.
Sure.
So a cherry is traditional. I'm going to go ahead and use a lemon peel because I feel like it, and I have it here. I think I've already started pulling off of this, guys. So we'll Just real nice and easy. Again, not getting any of the actual lemon inside of there, just the pith on the inside. Hamburger style, right across the top. And I can see the oils on top of my glass now. Wipe it around, lay it in there, and you've got your Manhattan. Cheers.
Perfect. Finishing touch. That's awesome. Well, let me ask you, thank you so much for joining us. We have a couple questions if you've got some time for us here. We're wrapping up. You've shown us so many of these cool bar tools. You mentioned if you're starting your bourbon journey, I wanted to know, is there some essential ingredients or some essential tools that you need that every home must have if you're just starting out?
When it comes to ingredients, I think that you should always have sugar, right? Which you generally have at home. And it's very easy to make your simple syrup no matter when you need it. Your simple syrups, every time that you make them, will only last about 2 weeks in your refrigerator. So just a heads up, they start to not be as great after about 2 weeks. So you want to ditch them, and easy to remake. Yeah, equal parts sugar, water. You can boil it if you want to. Honestly, if you just want to put it in the container and shake it up until the sugar dissolves, totally fine too. I would also have Angostura Bitters. It's just a general rule of thumb. A lot of your classic cocktails across all of your types of spirits, so not just bourbon, will call for bitters. And when it calls for bitters, it generally means Angostura Bitters. So making sure that you have those on hand. As far as the rest of it, if you drink Manhattans a lot, of course, have your sweet vermouth on hand. You don't have to though, and keep it in the fridge. I drink a lot of paper planes. Those are my favorites. So those require a couple more things. But if you find out what your favorite cocktails are, or you kind of know what seasons you go through, like I go through paper plane season, I go through margarita season. Like I have my favorites. So I tend to have those more on hand when that happens. So just know what you like.
Marianne, I see we have some questions coming in the chat. Are there any questions before we thank Beth?
Yeah, we just one, maybe two here. Can you talk a little bit about the non-alcoholic versions, a mocktail kind of versions?
Yes,
we'll make sure to send those out as well, Kim.
For sure. Yeah. Apologies. I meant to talk about that when I was talking about my mint julep, but I totally didn't. So instead of adding my bourbon into my mint julep, I would add my soda water in there. So instead of my 2 parts of bourbon, I would add 3 parts of soda, maybe 4 if you want a little bit more. It just depends on what you like your kind of sugar to soda water ratio to be. But that would be the best way to go about making a julep in a mocktail fashion. When it comes to the other 2 cocktails, unfortunately, they are very booze forward. So you would either get sugar and bitters or bitters, right, inside of that glass. So not always the best way to go for those 2 cocktails, but I do think that it's very easy to make mocktails if you have fresh fruit, if you have sodas, if you're a Sprite fan or something like that, and you want something a little bit more sweet with your soda, that can always be a great add-in. Ginger beer is a great way to go, non-alcoholic ginger beer specifically for this case. So like a mule where you would do lime juice and ginger beer and bitters, right? So some bitters don't actually contain alcohol, and that's what you would be looking for. Some bitters do contain alcohol. So you always want to make sure that you know what your ingredients actually include. Wonderful.
And I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit with this one. I'm not sure if we sent you this one in advance, but being that this is a Louisville alumni event tonight, do you have any recommendations for a red and black take on any of these, or any red and black cocktails that you like?
For sure. So you can always go a little bit more red if you put Campari in something. So if you go like a Boulevardier route, you're going to have your sweet vermouth, your Campari, and your whiskey in there. So that does tend to come out a little bit more red. And you can always garnish it with like the black cherries. So that could be a Manhattan-ish variant known as a Boulevardier with an extra ingredient. Other than that, I would say like your sours, you can manipulate a sour, which is typically going to be yellow. And you could put, say, a raspberry, maybe you need a little bit darker, so like a cherry jam in there as your sugar component. So you would add your lemon juice, your jam, your whiskey, make sure that it all mingles up together, and then shake it up. And you would have a bright red cocktail.